All right. Hello, everyone, and thank you all for joining us today. My name is Ryan Spillers, Program Coordinator for the Alliance for Innovation, and I would like to welcome you all to today's virtual session, something our panel and us are calling Customizing Budget Engagement for Your Community. Today's session is being brought by the Alliance for Innovation, Balancing Act, and Jeremy Lucas, Senior Budget and Management Analyst with Milwaukee County, Wisconsin. Now, during the next hour, we will hear from our panelists about how they built a two-way relationship with residents on financial issues, and whether to identify priorities, set levels of service, gauge interest in changing revenue, build public understanding of long-term structural problems, prepare for an election, get staff buy-in for change, or simply out of commitment to good governance. Now, before we do get started and dive into things here, one item to note to everyone that has signed up for today's session, we have made some amendments from its previously planned broadcast. Due to Hurricane Florence, our panelists in Norfolk, Virginia are not able to make it today. Instead, we have planned a part 2 session on October 10th. And the registration link has been sent out via email to that one. So today's session will be a bit shorter, though just as informative. To register, please view that email, but I will also be connecting it to you right now through the chat box. Of course, following up with you in the next coming weeks with that link as well. So I appreciate your patience with us on that, and let's keep diving into our content from here. All right, so before I do go in and introduce it to our panelists and turn it over to them for to hear their stories and their presentations, let me first remind you all about the Alliance and, well, our goal here today. It is through our incredible members that we aim to build sustainable, long-term, innovative cultures and help spread leading and emerging practices. Our hope here today is that we build a conversation around budgets and make that conversation more robust by hearing from you all. And we'll get to hear in just a moment on how you can submit those ideas and comments and questions. Also, to continue growing this conversation, I will be live tweeting through today's session at our handle there at @transformgov. But you can join us by tagging that handle, as well as tagging a few of our friends here. We have @BalancingActEP and, of course, @Milco PSB. So please join in the conversation on social if that's your cup of tea. All right. And finally, I wanted to highlight real quick on how you can use GoToWebinar. So I won't dive into all these options. Really what we want to focus in on is that yellow circle number 3, where we can get your ideas, comments, and questions. So on what's highlighted there, expand that section by pressing that sign. And from there, please add your question, hit submit, and I will get it on my end. And at the end of today's session, we will have a Q&A. And at that point, we will provide all these to our panelists here today. So feel free to send those comments, ideas, and questions in at any time, and I'll be collecting them on my end. All right. So for what you all tuned in for, today's main presentation will be presented by Chris Adams and Jeremy Lucas. All right, well, Chris has worked in public policy and facilitation for over 25 years. His work has focused primarily on health and healthcare, but he has also supported policy development in education and natural resources. Prior to founding Engage Public, Chris was a associate director of the Center for Ethics and Social Policy in Berkeley, California. He has published more than 40 essays and publications including the Los Angeles Times, New York Newsday, Christian Science Monitor, the San Francisco Chronicle, and of course others as well. He is a past speaker at the Distinguished Conference on World Affairs at the University of Colorado, delivering 5 presentations on the theme Values and Ethics in a Fragile World. Chris is the former president of the board of Denver Urban Gardens, a network of more than 100 community gardens. He's also a graduate of Yale University and University of Colorado. So joining Chris today will also be Jeremy Lucas, who is a senior budget management and analyst for Milwaukee County. Mr. Lucas came to Milwaukee County in 2015 and has helped manage the budgets for selected elected officials, Milwaukee County Parks Department, Milwaukee County Zoo, cultural and non-departmental revenues. Jeremy also managed Milwaukee County's Balancing Act software for the 2018 budget public engagement campaign, #EngageMKE. Jeremy also runs the Twitter account for the Office of Strategy and Budget, as we tagged on a few slides ago. He is a graduate from the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee with a master's in public administration. Well, at this point, I would like to welcome Chris and Jeremy to today's session, and from here, I will hand it off to Chris.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Ryan. It's a pleasure to be here. And once again, I just want to note to everyone on the webinar how sorry we are that our friends from Norfolk, Virginia could not be here. There was a mandatory evacuation order by the governor, and our best wishes for safety go out to everyone in the on the East Coast, especially in Virginia and the Carolinas. So today's presentation is intended to be about how to do community engagement for your community. One thing that we've learned through our couple decades of working with local governments is that every community is unique and has unique needs and challenges, as well as capacities. So I want to spend just a little bit of time talking about why you might do this. And this slide actually comes from a presentation I gave last week to the Transparency Task Force at GFOA. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about kind of what the what is and some tools and opportunities for moving forward. And then I'll turn it over to Jeremy, who's the real pro who has on the ground experience in terms of doing this. So why would an entity want to do, a local government want to do community engagement on the budget? Well, the first thing is that GFOA recommends it, that it's sort of a hallmark of good governance and good practice from their perspective. The second thing is whether GFOA recommends it or not. A lot of people who are called to public service, who work in local government, just simply think it's the right thing to do. We have a lot of entities. I'll say we have some clients that work with us that are struggling and have a particular problem they need to address, whether it's a revenue problem or a service level problem that they want to communicate with the public on. But I would say that the majority simply come to us because they think it's a part of good governance to find a way to communicate and have that two-way conversation with residents about the budget. And two hallmarks of that are transparency, and the United States and Canada local governments actually, I think, do a pretty good job with that, at least at the level of sharing in terms of making transparency available and accountability. The one caveat I would make is that there's a lot of different ways of doing transparency, and I'll talk about on the next slide. Some can be as simple as simply making PDFs available, and some can actually provide much more information through some visualizations. But beyond it being just the right thing to do or being recommended by the major professional organization in this field, there's some practical reasons why local governments might do this as well. Declining revenues, expenses are increasing. A lot of times, especially with the things that government buys, which is a lot of services often, it goes up faster than the revenue structure will allow, and there needs to be a way of communicating with residents about that and coming up with a solution that's acceptable to residents and also meets the realities of local government. Sometimes we found that there's political pressure to reduce spending. Sometimes the folks who are in charge of local government run on a platform of saying that they're going to reduce spending. I've had one city manager say that she wanted to use a simulation because she said, my council has made all these promises and there's just no possible way of delivering. And she said, I can't just make stuff up. And so by having that transparent relationship with residents, that information-rich experience with them, you can actually figure out ways to deal with both political promises as well as practical realities. We've got many localities that come to us because there's a need for a tax increase. Their revenue structures change, property values that might have been suitable 10 or 20 years ago to provide an adequate property tax to serve local government. The property valuation changes. Something might be out of whack. We've had some western counties, for example, that have a severance tax that were doing very well 5 or 10 years ago when there was the opportunity to, when energy was being extracted from the ground, and with the price of energy going down so low, that's actually completely changed their equation and their revenue balance, so they need to look at other revenue sources. Having that ability to have an information-rich conversation with people about what to do about that is a critical thing. There are a lot of governments in the U.S. and Canada have some structural issues that need to be dealt with, legacy infrastructure, bridges that need to be repaired, roads, other types of infrastructure. There's I think a growing concern about the viability of pension funding and those long-term consequences. And so there needs to be these are sort of boring, abstract issues, and there needs to be a way to have a conversation with people. And then the last thing, and this comes from some conversations with a lot of leading thinkers and observers, as well as practitioners in local government, is to find more ways of getting value for sharing transparency. We've heard from a number of clients that are concerned that just by being transparent, sometimes it's a data dump, sometimes it's a more visual affair, that there needs to be a way of getting that two-way relationship there. So transparency is terrific, but there needs to be a way of making it a two-way relationship as well. Next slide, please, Ryan. And then this next slide also comes from the presentation I gave last week to GFOA, and that's what's the what. So if you are of the belief, for either practical reasons or good governance reasons or a combination of both, that public engagement on the budget is appropriate, what are the options? And so the old standby is public meetings. Sometimes I've not heard very many good stories about public meetings on the budget. Sometimes it's called 3 minutes with the mic. It's usually not a very productive way of getting input. I've heard some city managers and budget officers talk about just being yelled at public meetings, and that it just often isn't that useful, especially with something as complex and even opaque as the budget that requires math, which often the public may not have a very high understanding of some of the math and that goes into to creating budgets. Often not very effective. But that is an option, and it's certainly a hallmark of governance in America and Canada. With the internet coming of age, PDFs of the budget have become ubiquitous. I don't think I can think of a local government that I've tried to find a PDF of their budget and I couldn't find that, so that's a very positive thing. CAFR's financial report, that's all becoming more and more available. A few local governments have taken to putting their checkbook online, which just basically means having a searchable database of the expenditures that have been made. That can be a very useful thing. I think there's a little bit of an issue with context, because sometimes a payment may not tell the reason for the expenditure, or it might be misleading. There's a lot of different issues there, but I think it's a great gesture. One thing that's become very popular in the last 6 or 7 years is to do visualizations of financial data and to make data sets available to folks. There's a lot of different ways of doing that. You can have visualizations that are static, just sort of visually depicting the data. You can have some that are live and that might be actually hooked in directly to a budgeting system or some other performance reporting system that update in real time, such as letting your residents look at your budgeted to actuals. There's some terrific ways of doing that. There's some really terrific companies that do that. One is OpenGov. Another one is Socrata. There's another one called OpenBook. Three of them have offerings that are particularly suited to the needs of government and do a great job. There's also some additional visualization offerings that also provide, I think, a lot of value because they're very cost effective. There's a company called Tableau that does visualization, and you can actually hook up live data sets to that. And then Microsoft has a very inexpensive product called Power BI that can do visualization. So visualization is something that I think a lot of entities are doing, and it makes a lot of sense too, and there's a lot of good opportunities to do that. The bottom two are sort of either new or newly useful. One is tax receipts. There's a scholar at the University of North Carolina, Whitney Alfonso, several years ago wrote an article about why local government should provide a tax receipt as a way of providing accountability. And the nice thing about it was she gave sort of a how-to in her article where she talked about doing the math and coming up with an average resident and then putting a tax receipt in like a utility bill, an annual utility bill, or an annual tax bill, something like that. There is some software, and I'll actually demo this a little bit later in the presentation about how you can do that online in a much more dynamic way. And I think, and even one that doesn't just look at an average person, but can allow residents to sort of estimate their taxes paid and then get a much more accurate accounting of what they're getting for their taxes and what they're paying for it. And the last one, this is what Jeremy's going to talk about, is simulations. And this is the one that I think is really coming of age in terms of both the technology as well as the expectation of residents, and then what I was talking about earlier about having this two-way ability to have conversations with folks. So if you could go to the next slide, please, Ryan. This is a graphic that was in an article that was in the Government Financial Review earlier this year. It's an article that was written by Mark Mack, who's a senior consultant at GFOA, and myself. And it's just sort of looking at the history of simulations. And using budget simulations can be documented in local governments in the U.S. all the way back to 1990 with Eugene, Oregon, using something called BOB, which was an acronym for Build Your Own Budget. And then there's some scholarship that was done in the 90s and then the 2000s that really talk about the usefulness and the utility of using simulations. But prior to 2007, 2012, depending on sort of when you mark this, it was all done by hand. It was done with paper and pencil, and there were complaints about. The positive thing was that people really got engaged with these, and they really sort of took these problem-solving tasks seriously, of trying to understand the situation in local government, trying to weigh trade-offs, taking into account constraints such as revenue restrictions, or even just the most basic constraint that you can't spend more money than you have. But it was also, there were two problems with it. One, it wasn't automated, and so there was a lot of human error, once again going back to math, just the general public's ability to do math, because people were asked to sort of add up their responses. But then the other one is that it's quite expensive, and the Norfolk folks were going to talk about doing a paper and pencil simulation in this presentation, but now you'll have to wait till October 10th to hear about it. But the nice thing is that it's a very effective way of getting people involved. But prior to, I'm going to say 2012, 2014, it really wasn't very practical because it was incredibly staff intensive, and it couldn't really reach that many residents. Like sometimes it's used with residents, sometimes it's been used internally. But what this article talks about is beginning in 2012, Johnson County, Kansas, created their own version of a budget simulation, did a terrific job. About the same time, City of Baltimore did. At that point, our company, Engaged Public, had been doing a budget simulation for the state of Colorado since 2007. Sorry, all of these are online versions that are interactive and dynamic. And in about 2015, we launched a version that that's sort of like the setup is very easy, which was one of the main constraints on doing simulations before. The setup is kind of like SurveyMonkey, and you've also got the ability to reach thousands and thousands of people at very low incremental cost. And so we really are at this inflection point in terms of the possibilities that can be done with doing budget engagement with your community. And part of it is that the technology is sort of catching up to the need, so that the best tool for doing public engagement on budgets, simulations, is now something that's readily available, and it's at a fairly low cost as well. Next slide, please. This is a table from the article that just talks about some of the challenges on the left and then how technology helps on the right. So low participation rates. Jeremy is one of the star performers in terms of finding ways of getting thousands of people to spend time learning about budget constraints and budget trade-offs and providing informed input. Inaccessibility of financial and budget data, as I said earlier, some of the really terrific software applications for transparency are making this data more accessible. One of the things that we believe is that making the data not just accessible but meaningful is providing ways for people to interact with it. And so now there's some really nice ways of doing that. Traditional community engagement folks would say, be cautious about expecting too much from an online opportunity for interaction, that you need to have opportunities for deliberation. And while it's not a bad thing or it's a good thing to have people spend 10 or 15 minutes learning online and then providing input, you also need to provide ways for deliberation. And so some of the tools that are available now actually are designed to be used in face-to-face settings to sort of frame a discussion, give everyone a little bit of a support, so it can actually be, these simulations can be used as facilitation tools, and I think that's very useful. And then this last one is a question that we've been getting for a number of years. People wonder about the representativeness of the people who show up and take the survey, who spend their 10 or 15 minutes learning about financial constraints. And on one hand, the answer is it's no different than a public meeting. It's who shows up. But the really cool thing, and this is once again sort of the cutting edge of the technology, both the technology as well as the methodology, is that our company with Balancing Act, we've been working with a university-based research team now for about 20 months to develop a really high-quality, low-cost way of getting representative information on resident budget preferences using sort of a modified version of the simulation. It's actually very exciting. We're looking for this to take off in the next year or two here, because by having a simulation, you get really good information on sincere preferences and willingness to pay. One of their findings is that budget surveys sort of exaggerate sort of the negative tendencies of residents. That budget surveys typically ask which services do you like the most, and with very few exceptions, residents like almost every service, and that they even blend things together, such as general funding for the fire department with having a very nice and elaborate 4th of July fireworks display, and everybody loves all of those things, even though they're very disparate and not similar amounts of money. And then if you ask them which taxes or revenue sources do you like the most, they almost say, oh, we hate all of these. And so that's led to what our research is showing is an erroneous conclusion that people aren't willing to think responsibly about the budget, that they don't get the connection between spending on services and revenue to pay for them. And what our research is showing, and we're doing a number of validations of this, is that when you give people an opportunity to see both the revenue and the spending together simultaneously in an interactive way, that they tend to think more responsibly. And by responsible, I just mean they tend to honor constraints, such as you can't spend more money than you have, and to, if there are state laws or whatever that constrain spending, that once they understand those things, that they actually take a different perspective, which is, how do we use our financial resources in the best way to serve the mission, purpose, and vision of their local government. And so we're finding this to be a very exciting time, and we love doing work with the Alliance for Innovation, because the local governments that are attracted to that tend to sort of share this optimism that by finding better and better tools and techniques and commitment and leadership, that we can do some really terrific things together. So I'm going to say a couple more things after Jeremy, but I'm going to stop here and turn it over to Jeremy Lucas.
All right. Thank you very much, Chris. I really appreciate the intro, and I want to also thank the Alliance for bringing this topic up and allowing me to share our story. Chris has been very helpful in kind of helping us navigate the technical portion of how to get this information out and to people. So what I'm going to do today is just share a little bit of a case study on our journey. We've done some extensive budget engagement the past 2 years, and we're actually wrapping up the second year as we speak here. So Let me just introduce you a little bit to Milwaukee County. We are the home of, next slide, please, Ryan, if you can. We're the home of Harley-Davidson, Johnson Controls, Northwestern Mutual Life. We do have some teams, the Bucks and the Brewers. 19 total municipalities, and of our not so claim to fame, as depending on who you ask, we are one of the top 10 most segregated cities in the U.S., which includes Milwaukee as our county. So with 19 municipalities, some of the issues that we have are, we do have very, very wealthy areas of the county, as well as some very highly impoverished areas. And no pun intended, but the issue is to balance a budget affecting both of the priorities of each of those populations. So I'm going to just kind of tell you how we had a problem to be solved and what we did there. You can get the next slide, Ryan. Budget engagement, as Chris pointed out, with public hearings and things, tended to be pretty, it just wasn't very useful. What you see on that slide actually is an actual picture from one of our budget hearings related to the Parks Department. It was a proposal to charge for parking as a new revenue stream in the Parks Department, and that was met with high levels of opposition. And the problem with traditional budget hearings is we used to do them about 2 or 3 years ago. 3 years ago, the budget hearing was much like you would have expected, and I expect it is a lot of different places across the country. There's a sign-up sheet, there's a microphone, the elected officials sit kind of in the front, and everyone gets about 3 minutes to try to persuade and change the minds of those in charge of determining where the finances go. What we found was it was really dominated by special interest groups. They were really interested in just saving their own program or advancing the specific issue of that group, and it didn't really show how every other part of the budget was connected. They were always like, it's not our problem to figure out what to do, you just need to save our program, and it's up to you to figure out what to do with the rest of that funding. So that was really one of the issues that we were looking to solve, is how do we make this time useful? And you can go to the next slide, Ryan. Another issue that we were running into was about 2 years ago, there was a lot of changes in state legislation. What you see is a picture of our wonderful county board. And as the two branches disagreed on a lot of things, the state legislature also did as well. So they moved our legislative branch to part-time, and they kind of revamped the structure of power in the county. What that really led to was a shift in power to the executive branch, and more importantly, we had a lot of distrust and animosity between the two branches, leaving us with policy paralysis. I mean, nothing ever got done, and I know that no one has ever seen that before on any level, but we were experiencing it pretty strongly, to the point where day-to-day things were just being bogged down by this issue. So next slide, please, Ryan. So we had a two-pronged goal, really. What we wanted to do was make the time useful, the budget input process a valuable time for both us as staff, for our elected officials, and for those people that choose to spend their very valuable time coming and giving us the input that we were looking for. Also, because of the two branches were kind of deadlocked on their opinions for any number of things, we wanted to use that input to move in any direction, be it the executive branch's direction or even the legislative branch. We needed a referee to kind of break the tie and move forward with actual governance. Next slide, if you could, Ryan. So we enlisted the help of Balancing Act, and we put together our public engagement tool, our simulation, and we decided to try to brand it as Engage Milwaukee, Engage MKE. We thought we would try to bring it kind of with the social media hashtag and make sure that people knew what they were getting into related to the online presence. So for the tool, our main goal as a staff was transparency. It was a very high priority. We wanted to make this tool essentially a true-to-life digital representation of our budget document. And it did turn out very much that way. It had every department, their budgets were listed, there were full transparency. We limited the revenues that we as a county could not change. We locked categories for mandated items that we were not in control of in relatives to eliminating departments or things of that nature. We really allowed anyone to become an armchair budget analyst, which, you know, here in the budget office, we thought that would be a great thing. Who would not want to be a budget analyst and have the ability to see into this and make these decisions? But it turned out it was actually a little bit too transparent. It was very complicated. As Chris has talked about, you know, the nuances of the budget, you know, can tend to be very overwhelming. In conjunction with the way that we designed the tool, we used some outreach, and I would just label it as pretty traditional and really low budget and very free. You know, we used the Facebook account of the county executive's office. We did get some local online daily magazines to do some stories for us, a little bit of a radio. The NPR did some stories, and you know, we did get some exposure that way. We also really hit a lot of our larger civic groups and talked to them about it, the Rotary clubs and the Kiwanis. And that was the extent of it. We thought, you know, by making something and putting it out on the internet where anyone, you know, in the world could actually get a hold of it, that, you know, we were doing a lot of what we needed to do to increase our feedback from basically the 2 budget meetings that we would have, our input budget meetings. And if we go to the next slide, Ryan, I can kind of show you the results of that. So we had 3,300 page views, 85% unique. We had 200 unique submissions, to 240 unique submissions to our tool, which gave us a lot of good feedback. And you know what we found out was very important, that was that people were willing to spend 24 minutes on average just sifting through the budget in this digital form. And that was a really kind of an enlightening revelation for us. Some of the issues that we ran into was that there was a big skepticism that we essentially, you know, were leading the witness. You know, we designed the tool to achieve a predetermined outcome. You know, and the other thing that was something that we were struggling with is that there were no good answers. A lot of the feedback that we got was that there was a little bit of a frustration because the end user didn't really like the results that they came to as they were going through the tool. And that was also revealing for us. And one last note on this part is that our social media channels kind of determine the population reached for our engagement. So when we used the Facebook or we used the Twitter accounts, and we went to civic organizations that are already civically engaged, your Rotary clubs, your Kiwanis, and you know, the demographic populations that use some of the social media tools, especially Twitter, are tended to be high on the socioeconomic scale. So what we realized is when we went to those groups, they were, you know, maybe the ones that were already coming to our budget hearings, and they were already engaged. So what we needed to get to were other people. And we realized that if people were willing to spend a lot of time on the site delving into the information, but they got frustrated by, you know, the results of what they were working on, more or less due to the fact that the structures in place, our revenue streams, our mandated expenditures and things, led them to that. More so, we feel, than the design of the tool. What we talked about is, like, what we needed to use this more for was as an educational tool. And that is actually what we really worked on doing this year as we revamped it and gave it another go. If you could change the slide for me, Ryan. So this year, we went at this a little bit differently. We have the tool hosted on its own website called thebetter414.com. And 414 is the phone area code that encompasses the entire county. And what we did with the tool that was different than the previous year was we really simplified it. We put the expenditures in mandated or non-mandated categories. So we either, we let people know that these are things we have to do, these are things that we don't have to do, but we do anyway, or we think that they're a good idea. We separated everything underneath that into larger functional areas. What it ended up resulting in is not a lot of tabs came up. There wasn't a lot of visual distractions. It was very much like public safety. Even though there are a few things that are in public safety, everyone more or less gets the idea of what's involved in public safety. So keeping it kind of at a higher level, and we did open up some of the categories. So we had been a very controversial sheriff here in the county a couple of years ago, and a lot of people, that was one thing that they were, upset about, was that they were not allowed to reduce the budget authority of the sheriff, because they were disagreeing with a lot of the things that he was doing. So to a point, we realized that not every single function of the sheriff is a requirement, and we allowed people to reduce some of those things. We allowed them to reduce it down to a floor, which gave people the feeling that they were in more control. We also just allowed both specific policy options. We loaded it with a lot of very familiar initiatives to some of those in the county that we're frustrated with the budget process, which revolve around the same kind of reductions year over year. It's just different ideas, and also general reductions for the categories at large. So I just think you guys should take a 2% reduction, and we allowed people to do that. We even, which was huge for us, took a baby step on revenue. We are very constricted here at the county for revenue streams. It's property tax, a half-cent sales tax, vehicle registration fees, and any other revenue generally comes from another governmental entity. We do have some fees for service, but those revolve around recreational, like parks, golfing fees, things of that nature. So this year we actually allowed people to have another option. We let them open up the property tax instead of putting people in a constricted area. We let people have some room, which is instructed to us to let us know where among these options where people would prefer to pay more, and without sacrificing the learning experience of the difficult situation that we are in, we have kind of loosened up the reins a little bit, become a little more lenient. So that was kind of what we did with the tool, and using the outreach. This was the biggest step that we've taken so far. We really we utilized resources that we already had. We thought previously that you could kind of put things on the internet and people would just come to it if you gave them a link or you just told them about it, and they would show up. And it takes a lot more work than that. And what we did was we utilized our existing customer databases. We already have email lists for the Zoo Society membership and the Parks Department and our golfers and our Office of Persons with Disabilities. They all have email address databases. So we decided to tap into those resources and send them out. We previously hosted the tool on our county website, and prior to the remodel of our county website, it was old and it was very clunky. It was very difficult to navigate. But we decided to just bypass it entirely and move to a microsite. And the thing about the microsite that we thought really worked well was we kind of shifted the focus from what we wanted. We wanted to engage Milwaukee to what everyone wanted. We moved to a bigger picture, which is, we're working toward a better 414. So, that was more a paradigm shift in what we were looking for, and it sent a different message to our citizens as well. It was more big picture. And then finally, we went to the people. We went to all different groups. We got on the agendas for already established commissions, subcommittees, parks groups, employment boards, neighborhood associations. The tool will be open about 60 days, and we've gone to over 30 meetings. So about every other day in the county, somebody was, either from the county executive staff or our office, the budget office, someone has heard about this tool one way or another. And the bigger thing that we wanted to do was to diversify the outreach, because we discussed previously last time with Engage Milwaukee, we were really a slave to the channels that we used for outreach. So we really wanted to make sure that we got a broad-based response back from all of our citizens. And we did do some paid social media. We did, we also engaged our civic partners at the Wisconsin Policy Forum or other groups to kind of put it on their social media. So there was a lot of partnerships involved in better414.com. Next slide, Ryan. So what's that translated to so far? We plan to close the tool actually at the end of the week here. And we have a little bit, I just checked the numbers this morning. We have about 4,700 views, 84% are still unique. That's 645 submissions and 25 minutes, almost 26 minutes average time on site. So we had a 250% increase in our engagement so far. And some of the things that are most encouraging include the fact that we do have some representation from some of our highest poverty zip codes. It's much more representative, much more diverse. Also, the results are pointing to, as Chris somewhat mentioned, decision makings. If you allow the citizens to see everything on the table, they will surprisingly make really good financial decisions. We have offered the people as a revenue option to pull from our reserve, and they actually chose not to. They decided that most people that took this, that submitted from a Better 414 this year, were prudent and realized that reserves are for emergencies, and they did not draw from that as a way to solve the issue. So it's a very surprising thing that we've run across so far. And more, and what we've run to the qualitative feedback is that, people have stopped kind of complaining about the things that we do here in the county, and they've turned their attention to, the larger structural issues around the way that the state funds municipalities and just the way that we work here. So, instead of fighting against each other or being mad about the smaller decisions that we are capable of making here, they're really coalescing around the idea that, not our county, but every county and all their local municipalities, there is a little bit of an imbalance in the way that those revenues are distributed. And so it's kind of led to a really better focus on higher level policy decisions. And we're very happy about that so far. Next slide, please, Ryan. So what we want to do, and we plan to do this, is we plan to distribute the results to everyone who's provided contact information, and we plan to, also give some of this data to our municipal partners who've been so helpful in getting their own citizens at the local level to really work on using the tool. And we've really determined that we've sparked a little bit of a fire in a lot of people as well, and we want to continue that engagement. So what we know is there are at least 4,000 people, give up about 30 minutes of their time to just dig into our finances, and they care that much. So we want to continue that relationship. We've got them, and we want to maintain that kind of engagement with them moving forward. Possibly, to help put pressure on the legislature to reevaluate some of their local funding sources, or even just to have the large-scale conversation about which priorities people are willing to pay for, or which priorities are, where they are in line, like what place parks should have in reference to some of the health and human services or safety net options. And as we've determined, we realized that with Engage Milwaukee, and now also so far with the Better 414, people are willing to pay more for the services that they care about. And it's an amazing thing. And it's kind of opens some eyes, but if people find a value in the things that you do, they are willing to pay for them. So that's kind of where we've been so far. Next, I would like to just take you guys through a little bit of some of the deeper dashboard analytics that we've gotten from Balancing Act and our simulation that help people understand that we're looking to use this moving forward, very much deeper into the year and operationally. So if I can get that screen, I will show you guys a little bit here on what we've discovered. Ryan, if you could give me control, please.
Ryan, this is Chris. I think you might have given the control to me instead of Jeremy.
You are correct. Let me readjust that now.
Okay.
All right, Jeremy, should be popping up on you.
There we go. All right. So what you're looking at here, this is the dashboard that we have for our specific budget simulation. And what we've done is we've drilled down into the non-mandated categories. And I've got it sorted by the decreased amount submitted. So simulation-wide, most people have chosen to reduce our bus routes by the largest dollar amount. And following that is the Parks Department. And some of that information is very interesting to us at the county and here in the budget office, because the group of people that showed up loud and proud earlier this year to protest the paid parking may also just be not as large of a contingency as we think they are, because there's been lots of interactions in this category, which you can probably see to the side here. The interaction percentage, over 50%, and when they've still been a lot of reductions in that department. One of the other locations that we were looking at that provides some deeper information is in the Office on African American Affairs. Now, this office is a very new office. It's less than a few years old, and some of the qualitative comments show that the public doesn't quite understand what the mission or the values or what the purpose of the office is. It's very instructive, and we were planning on using this information to help the department understand that that they can do a better job, that maybe their first step in their mission in being productive is to do a better job of communicating what exactly their purpose is in the county and to the citizens. And then finally, the last thing that I just wanted to highlight is the cultural contributions. Milwaukee County provides money to all sorts of different cultural groups that work in our buildings. And we still own the buildings, but we provide them operating support. And what we've run here is that there's plenty of people, 24% or 27%, 23%. There's support for the reduction in those categories. And those were previously thought politically untenable, that was kind of like something that you would never consider doing. So we plan on taking this data and working through it. This is just a small snapshot, I guess, of all the other different categories that we have to sift through when we get to the end of this process. And if you like data, there's a lot to work through. So we're looking forward to it. But there's just a lot of information that can be gleaned from this engagement that will help not only operationally, and fiscally in the future. So I thank you guys for the opportunity, letting me talk about our story. We're very excited about how we've been able to ramp this up a little bit, and we want to make sure that we take this, great thing that we've got going with our engaging the public and continue it in the future. So thank you. I think we'll turn it back over to Chris here.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you, Jeremy. I always learn so much from you and all of our clients in terms of your experiences, and much of that is new. So thank you so much for sharing. I'm going to shorten my presentation. I was going to, because we wanted to sort of present an array of tools. I'm actually not going to do that because we only have about 8 minutes left on the webinar. So I'm going to just quickly talk about, I'm just going to give a little bit of a punchline because I want people to have a chance to ask Jeremy questions, because I think what he said was very important. Is everybody looking, Brian and Jeremy, are you guys looking at my slide where it says, what are the objectives?
We certainly are.
Okay, good. So I'm just quickly. So this also is borrowed from my presentation to GFOA last week. So earlier I talked about kind of what the why is, and then what's the what, which are some various tools. And Jeremy has talked about all the tools they've used with social media, with the simulation, gathering all sorts of data. Now just talking about what are the objectives. And so it seems to me that if you care about having this type of relationship with residents, there's two things you need to do. You need to get residents who are informed and residents who are engaged. And these next 2 slides, or actually 3 slides, talk about what the payoff is for you. And so this slide is from a study that was done by the Center for California Studies. I think they used about a sample of about 500 or 600. And they just found some great examples of what happens when people are informed and engaged. And so the statistic talks about the probability of simultaneous preferences for lowering taxes and increasing services. It just dramatically decreases when people are informed and engaged. So on the left, you see the percentage when people are uninformed and disengaged. And on the far right, you see what it is when people are informed and engaged, that people are just more reasonable, that they don't expect local government to do magic, to make things appear from nothing. This next slide is about improving the attitude towards tax. It's the same survey, same scale. On the left is uninformed and engaged, and it's the belief that sales tax rate is too high. When people are uninformed and disengaged, it's about 45%. When they're informed and engaged, it's about 26%. So there actually is a payoff by doing this, by investing in transparency and participation efforts through budget engagement, that you get something for it. This next slide is from a big study that was done by a guy named Benedict Jimenez, and he studied using ICMA data. He studied cities that after the financial crisis of 2008, 2009, cities that proactively made an attempt to do budget outreach by having some type of participation. He had about 6 different categories. At that point, simulations weren't really readily available, so he didn't include that. But his finding was, if you just do something, there's a positive outcome to it. And so the quote from his study that I like the most is, in participatory cities, nothing is off the table when dealing with a fiscal crisis. So whether the fiscal crisis comes because of national trends or aging infrastructure, or maybe it's not even a crisis, maybe it's just wanting to sort of develop that two-way capacity so that you have the ability in the future that investing in participation will pay off. And this last slide I just love a great deal. This is from Kansas City. And for me, I've been talking a lot about, and Jeremy's been talking about, wanting to have this two-way relationship. But we all know that sometimes the public, even if public officials are willing to have this relationship and understand that residents may not trust government, sometimes that can go both ways. And so I think it takes a brave public official to want to extend that trust both ways. And so this is a picture from Kansas City's budget process last year, and they actually won the GFOA Award of Excellence for this and some other things they did this last May in St. Louis. But what I love is the quote. It's from a guy named Adam Blom, who is the analyst that worked on it. And he said, the amazing thing is that residents are almost silent as they go through the exercise because they're concentrating so hard on making these decisions. So I talk to budget officials and managers all the time who are concerned that, the public, they're just going to zero things out and they won't take this seriously. if you give them the right tools and the right setting and sort of the right spirit of reaching out to them, they will meet you with trust, and you can actually find a place where you can work things out and come up with a good solution. So I'm going to stop there because I want people to have a chance to ask Jeremy in particular questions.
All right. So as Chris just mentioned, we will open it up here for, but I just wanted to say first off, thank you, Chris and Jeremy, for the wonderful talk and presentation. So on that note, if you did have any questions, comments, please submit those now to the questions section while we still have time left. So on that note, with the ones that we have gone in, let's dive on in while we still can. So Jeremy, one thing that you had mentioned towards the end of your presentation was regarding that citizens once they are more than willing to fund the programs they care about. And you said that you highlighted how sometimes you got to demonstrate that mission. Did you pick up on anything that, is there methods in which you can highlight the services that you provide to up that level of citizen interest and wishing to maintain that service?
I think what we ended up doing, what really drives a lot of it, was the use of our partners to get them to talk to their users. When their users understood, what was great is like our Office of Persons with Disabilities has a massive Twitter following, surprisingly, and they were able to engage the people that use their services, and for fear of kind of stacking the deck, though, that they really were able to respond, and even though we knew that some of them were kind of behind this department, the reality is it's a very small department, and it still forced them to make the decisions on how to balance the rest of the county-wide issues along with their priorities for the services they really use and appreciate.
Great. All right, let's jump into one other question, and as things would turn out, we do have that part 2 coming up in October. So, any questions that we don't get to touch on today, feel free to continue to add those to our post-session survey, and we will, in fact, touch on those for our next session. So let's jump into one last question here. All right. So, Jeremy, could you, may have been mentioned, but could you dive a little bit into the demographic data that was collected from the participants? For example, residents versus non-residents, did it highlight median household income, those sorts of things?
Certainly, and that actually was a very important part of how we tried to, we put a lot of consideration in the types of information that we wanted to collect. If we wanted to make a lot of the categories mandatory or not, related to how much would participation fall off if the user felt that the government was trying to collect too much of their personal information. So for this specific year, we just kept zip code, but we kept a lot of information optional, and a lot of people have filled that in, and we were able to kind of compare what we got with some of the Google Analytics that Chris provides, and they seem pretty close. I mean, we got a lot of our representation from the city of Milwaukee, but that's understandable because they are the largest group of people, the largest municipality, and we have a pretty good split of about 60% of the people in the middle 3 demographic ranges, 25 to 64. So we're very happy about that, and we even added to determine which one of the groups were county employees or not, if they chose to answer it. So now we almost have an employee engagement data set to add to the rest of it. So the ability to get the information is very robust. If you ask for it, you can get it. It's just a matter of making the decisions on, is it appropriate, and how much do we want to request from those that we're already asking to take time and help us out.
Got it. Well, thank you so much for taking on those questions, and just to reiterate to folks, we are past that top of the hour, so if you did have questions, please still submit those, and we'll pass those on to Jeremy in the meantime. If not, touch on those again in part 2. So on that note, let's do some quick wrap-up slides. So I just wanted to highlight that the handout for today's session is currently available in your control panel and accessible for download. If you are having a bit of trouble getting to that, feel free to reach out to me directly at rspillers@transformgov.org. I would be happy to provide you the handout for today's session, as well as answer any questions that you may have. All right, so I also wanted to highlight really quickly some other learning events that we have coming up, and of course, want to note again that part 2 on 1010. You can access more about that right there through that link. All right, and on that note, wanted to, again, I've posted the link there for the session next time. Please do head over there and register for that part 2. But on that note, I wanted to thank the audience for joining us today. And of course, we have a post-session survey. If you could answer those questions and provide us feedback, that helps us improve our learning sessions. But beyond that, I want to finally say a big thank you to Jeremy and Chris for providing this presentation and this talk. I think you both touched on some really great things, and hopefully we can continue that conversation online and into part 2. But on that note, I want to wish everyone a wonderful rest of your day, and thank you again for joining us. Bye.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Thanks to the Alliance.